right, gentlemen, you are live.
Hey, welcome everybody to the.
Hello.
Is it the No, this is the Wednesday edition of the Tuesday Night Live for Restore Oregon Now. I'm David Darnell with Restore Oregon Now, director of Restore Oregon Now, and I have a screen there. Gotta get rid of that. And I'm joined by Bill Currier, also director of Restore Oregon Now. How you doing tonight, Bill?
I'm doing great.
Good.
Really well.
Glad to hear it. One of the missions that we have stated at Restore Oregon Now, and you can find us at restoreoregonnow.org, but one of our missions is to educate people. And tonight we're going to have a discussion about primaries, elections, voter registration, just to kind of help people get up to speed, know how this stuff works, and know what's going on in Oregon electoral politics. And I'll open it up by saying that I'm a little bit of an electoral nerd, in so much as I read all the numbers and I do all the forensics after the elections to see what worked and see what didn't work. And essentially in the state of Oregon, because people want to know, Bill, how do we get rid of this supermajority, this Democrat supermajority in the state of Oregon? And really, we're a nonpartisan group, but, our problems are being caused by the one-party rule in Oregon. So I think we can identify them as something that needs to be broken up and balance restored in the legislature and the executive branch in the state of Oregon. So people ask, how can we do that? How do we get rid of that? How come we haven't had a Republican governor since 1987? How come this, that, and the next thing? And I think it's good to, number one, start with a real grounded, what's the word I'm looking for? Non-anecdotal premise. So it is true that we have not had a Republican governor since 1987. That was Vicatia. We instituted vote by mail, I believe, in 1990. That was passed by citizen initiative. It was passed 2-1 by the voters. Wasn't passed by the legislature. And we have had since that time, we have had a Republican majority in the Senate until 2002. And we had a Republican majority in our House up to 2005. And we had one of the three highest officials, governor, secretary of state, and treasurer. We had a Republican secretary of state elected in 2016. So it's not as bad as a lot of people look at it and say, we haven't had a darn Republican ever elected and they've been in control of everything for a long time. The fact of the matter is again, we did have Republican control of the Senate till 2002, the House till 2005. We had a split in the House in 2010 or 2011 and 2012 actually would have been the sessions. And we also had a split in the Senate as well. So the reason things have changed, and I'm not discounting voter fraud at all here. I think we all know that vote by mail could be rife with fraud. We know it certainly self up.
Yeah, it is.
Like that. Yeah. But what has happened is our voter registration has changed dramatically over the last decade. So there are about 760,000 registered Republicans in the state of Oregon. There are about 1,060,000 or 300,000 more registered Democrats in the state of Oregon. And there are about 900 and probably 60,000 now non-affiliated voters, primarily due to the motor voter law, which, if you're not familiar with that, was passed by the Oregon legislature and requires that everyone who I think has any business at the DMV is registered to vote unless they opt out, if I remember how that works correctly. And then we have about 125,000, maybe 130,000 independents. The independent party, if you're registered I, you are a member of a party. You're not independent. You're actually a member of a party. And it's kind of a left-leaning party, actually. And then the rest of the voter registrations take up by various small parties. So the reason that we've shifted, to these Democrats supermajorities is because we have 300,000 more Democrats than we do Republicans. And really the only way to change that is to change the voter registration, because people, by and large, I don't know what the number is, but it's really high percentage, by and large, will vote for the party candidate for which they're registered. Now, even though we're down 10 points in voter registration, we only lose statewide elections by about 6 points, by about 6%. We lose state elections by about 150 to 200,000 votes, depending on the office, depending on the candidates, depending on how much money was spent in the campaign. And I like to use Newt Bueller's campaign because even though I wasn't a Newt Bueller guy in the primary, I voted for him in the general because he was a Republican candidate. But I like to use him because he matched the Democrat spending dollar for dollar. He raised more money, I think, than anyone has ever raised in the state of Oregon. And so it was not an outspent or underspent or anything like that situation with his loss. Now, he lost by 129,000 votes, if I remember correctly. So about 130,000 votes is all we lost by. So he pulled a lot of non-Republican votes. Whether those were Democrats, we don't know, because you don't know how people vote. Whether they were non-affiliated voters, we don't know, because you don't know how people vote. But we do know that he pulled about 200,000 non-Republican voters. So in order to fix this, in my opinion, just my opinion only, is we need about 130,000 to about 150,000 more Republican voters. I think if we had that registration, I think everything would change. What say you, Bill?
Thanks. That's a great start for what we want to talk about tonight, which is the concept of open primaries. I think that registering voters is the number one goal, and really the question should be, how is whatever we do, and if you're a Republican, the question should be, because I'm talking about this from the party perspective and not a specific party, but if you're a Republican, you should be asking yourself, how do we register more Republicans? I mean, that's because of what you just said, David. And so in terms of the open primary concept, how does that perhaps result in more registered Republicans? Because any kind of short-term borrowing of non-Republican voters has a price that you pay for it. And we're going to talk about that here in just a moment. It's a huge price and it's a big risk. And it's never worked before in Oregon. So that's something that needs to be considered. But David, I wanted to make sure that over the next few minutes, as people are listening, they're hearing both the reasons why people might argue this should be done. I'm talking about an open primary, and specifically, we're talking about an open primary to select the Republican nominee for governor. That's what we're talking about. Now, you could apply that to other races, statewide races, for example. But right now, we're talking about, should Oregon Republicans open their primary, and I want to underscore the word their primary, to non-Republicans, in this case, non-aligned voters, which is a large group, as you mentioned, to help select the Republican nominee for governor going into the general election. That's the question that we're sort of talking about here. And I think that first thing is that there are different types of open primaries. In Oregon, voters have already turned down open primaries as a state law where all parties would open their primaries to all voters. They've turned that, voters in Oregon have turned that down twice. So that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about a general open where everybody can vote in any for any party's candidates. We're talking about like that, and that's also known as a top two, which California has now. And some of you may be familiar with how that worked in California, so you might want to use that for some comparison. But in this case, it would be the party choosing through its state central committee, specifically on February 5 in Salem at their next meeting. The state central committee would be deciding whether they want to allow non-Republicans to select the Republican nominee for governor in the upcoming primary election. So that's really the question.
Right. Let me back up just a little bit for people, for the uninitiated, because primaries I think can be a little bit confusing for people. I know I've had people call me and say, "Hey, I didn't have Donald Trump on my primary." I said, "Well, are you registered?" "Yeah, I'm a independent." And it's like, okay, well, let me explain this to you. So primaries in the state of Oregon, there are two major parties. A major party is defined in the state of Oregon by, I think, a percentage of the number of voters. And we only have two. The independent party wafts in and out of having enough people to be a major party, and then they're not, and then they are. But the two major parties are Democrat and Republican. And their primaries, only Democrats can vote for Democrat candidates, and only Republicans can vote for Republican candidates.
That's the definition of a closed primary.
That's the definition of a closed primary, and that's what we have here in Oregon. And that allows the parties to choose their candidate that they want to put forth in the general against the other. In the state of Oregon, it would be the other major party's candidate. And that's the way it works in the state of Oregon. And so what we're talking about here is selectively opening up a primary. In this particular instance, we're talking about the Republican primary in the state of Oregon that will happen in May to non-affiliated voters. Is that correct, Bill? Is that the proposal on the table as far as we?
Well, you bring up an interesting aspect to all of this, and that is that we are hearing that there is going to be a proposal put in front of the Republican State Central Committee at that February 5 meeting in Salem to open up at least the gubernatorial primary for governor for all. So we have 15 Republicans right now running for governor, right?
Right.
I don't know if they've all filed, but at least 14 I think have filed now. So it's a huge number. So we're going to open that up. Is what we're hearing. But the problem is, and this is one of my concerns. And let me just back up and say, look, I was formerly chair of the Oregon Republican Party, and so I'm quite familiar with the open primary concept. We battled that here in Oregon with Measure 90 and defeated it. And I'm familiar with some of the constructs of semi-open primaries, or primaries where a party chooses to allow non-party members to select their nominee. And one of the concerns I have is that this is a decision that's coming up in just a few weeks, and we don't have the language for what's being proposed. We only have we only have that the topic is on the agenda, and the closer we get to that date, the less informed people will be, in the sense that they won't have a chance to discuss the merits of this like we're doing right now, until they actually have the wording of the proposed change that they're gonna decide on. And that's a lot of pressure to put people under. You're gonna make a decision that impacts the entire state and could impact our ability to elect a Republican governor on one day or a few days or whatever. So I'm concerned that we don't have that proposed language in front of us right now to examine and to critique and decide, is this good? Is it bad? And each person can make that decision on the State Central Committee, but right now they don't have that information to make that decision. So that's one of my main concerns here, is that we're hearing that it's going to happen. We're hearing that that decision is going to be put in front of people, but we have no decision on which to evaluate that possible decision. And to ask people to do that with a short presentation, no matter how good the data is really, and probably under some pressure, because the primary is coming up. And there are certain filings that have to be done by the party with the state in order to make this happen. So there isn't time to dilly-dally. You've got to make the decision right away. Well, if there's all this pressure to do this right away, we should have a chance to absorb and consider and debate and discuss and think about this. And then on the day of the decision, there can be some final arguments and some final presentation. But to ask people to make a huge decision like that on the day of would not be good. So I'm really hoping that more information comes out so that we can look at this and the actual facts. So for tonight, David, we're kind of covering what we've heard, but it isn't in print yet. It isn't formalized yet, and so it's really really hard to talk about it.
So kind of what we're assuming here is that we're going to do pretty much the same thing we did in 2012. I was part of the Oregon Republican Party Central Committee at that time. We met in Lynn County, as a matter of fact, and it was proposed by then Chair Alan Alley, and I listened to the argument, and the argument I thought was good. So here's the argument for opening up the primary. If we open up the primary to non-affiliated voters, no one else, not Democrats, not independents, not anybody else, but if we open it up to non-affiliated voters and we allow them to cast a vote for our candidate for the general, let's just say the gubernatorial election, if we allow them to do that, the chances of them coming back in the general and voting for our candidate, and this is how the pro argument goes, is quite high. And as we discussed at the beginning of the show, we need 129,000, 130,000, or 150,000 more votes to win statewide. We need that. At the end of the day, electoral politics is just math. If you have one more vote, you win.
Cheating aside, it's math. Yes.
Yeah, cheating aside, yeah, it's math. So I listened to that argument in 2012. I thought, okay, well, that makes sense. I mean, we're just doing it for one election. We're just doing it for, it may have just been one office at the time, as a matter of fact. I think you brought that bill up. I don't really remember, but it was just one election, one primary. It was just non-affiliated. And I thought, yeah, let's give it a shot. I thought the risk was fairly low at that time. But there were far, far fewer non-affiliated voters in 2012 than there are now. Just a fraction of what they are now. And maybe that's an argument in favor of doing it again. But I thought, let's try it. And so we did. The Central Committee voted on it, said, yeah, let's run up the flagpole and see who salutes. Well, the fact of the matter is hardly anybody saluted. And one of the things that we know, we don't know how non-affiliateds vote. We can do exit polling, and we can kind of get an idea given non-affiliated voters in certain areas, but we don't know how they vote. But we do know how many voted, and typically they're below 50%. They don't vote. They didn't take the time to.
And that's much lower today with the types of NAVs that we have coming in through motor voters. So yeah. I mean, they're not interested in voting. They're just not going to vote, and they didn't vote. And in 2012, we opened up the primary, and the fact of the matter is, they didn't vote. It was an insignificant change, and I thought, okay, well, we tried, didn't work, and that's kind of, I think, what we're assuming, since we don't have the actual language on this, that roughly that's what we're trying to do now. And so, I looked at it after that experience, and I go, well, we have far more NAVs than we ever had, and I think that ups the risk of people voting for candidates that are not. NAVs aren't necessarily Republicans. They don't necessarily have Republican values. Republicans are Republicans because they identify with the values found in the platform of the Republican Party, and they register that way. Same with Democrats. NAVs don't have that. And so I look at it and I go, it didn't work then. I can't see how it can work now. Well, yeah, you've touched on some great points. One is that one of the arguments in favor of opening the primary, the gubernatorial primary, for the Republican gubernatorial primary, because it's really the Republican primary. It's the Republican primary because it's where Republicans choose their nominee for the general. Democrats do the same thing. Any other major party does the same thing, right? That's the whole point of a primary, is for the party to select its nominee to put forward. And so you've touched on a great point, which is if you have non-Republicans helping select the nominee that the Republicans put forward, well, is that candidate going to be likely to be more or less true to our platform and our principles? I think anybody can answer that question. They're going to be less likely. And so if you really care about the platform and our principles, you're not going to allow people outside the party to help select the candidates. They're supposed to be committed to our platform and our principles. But the thing is that I forgot you brought up something I was gonna speak to for a moment. Sorry.
Well, yeah. I think one of the other things that that we set ourselves up for in doing this, and I guess this is an argument against opening up the primary, is like you said, we have a much greater possibility of ending up with a nominee for the general that will be not really all that Republican. Because in Oregon for the last decade, at the very least, perhaps even before that, but I know for the last decade, the standard political wisdom among political operatives, political consultants in the state of Oregon, is that you need to run to the left as a Republican to get elected in the state of Oregon. And we have been doing that without success for at least a decade. We saw it with Newt Buehler. 20 million bucks, 20 million bucks, spoke out against Donald Trump. Doesn't really care, well, he's not even a Republican anymore. He's now an independent, I think, or maybe a non-affiliate. I'm not sure, but, and the base, people like you and me, and probably a lot of the people that are watching this look at that and go, I'm just not excited here. There's no contrast, between Kate Brown and Newt Buehler, it kind of looks like. Now, I would love to have had Newt Buehler elected. Okay, I voted for him, and I think we would be much better off
Still
if he had.
Kate Brown, yeah.
But the voter, they need to look at contrast, especially if you're trying to pull in, a Democrat voter. The Democrat looks and goes, okay, this is the Democrat that I know, and this is the Democrat mostly that I don't know. Who am I going to vote for?
Exactly.
And so I think what you end up with is that middle of the road, maybe a little further to the left, Republican candidate that has been continually losing in the state of Oregon for 10 years. Now, we had a statewide win in 2016 in the state of Oregon. A Republican won statewide, and he was conservative Republican who did not run to the left, who did not abandon his principles, and did not abandon the platform and did not abandon his party, and that was Dennis Richardson.
And the way we were able to do that was to have Dennis run on the platform of transparency and accountability for the office that it was seeking, not abandoning the Republican platform and principles like Newt was doing, but actually adhering to them and saying, I'm going to focus on the job of Secretary of State and left out the ugly, as it were, politics. The bottom line is, I'm going to be very frank here for our listeners. If we open up our gubernatorial primary to allow non-Republican, in this case, non-aligned voters, to help select our nominee, we are more likely to end up with a Newt Buehler than a Dennis Richardson. We are changing, we're moving that field. We're making, and I don't know how I could make it any clearer. So if we want to move more towards Newt Buehler type candidates, okay, then we should let people who don't share our values, because he clearly doesn't, he's left the party, we should let them help select our candidate. But if we'd rather have people like Dennis who stand true to their principles and platform, then we should let people who are committed to our platform and principles select that nominee, like we did with Dennis, by the way.
And at the very least, this whole process, like you had already mentioned, we really don't know. I mean, there doesn't seem to be a lot of transparency in this whole proposal. And for those of you who have never been to a central committee meeting, a lot of stuff happens very quickly. And this is a fairly substantive change, like said Bill, that affects the entire state and affects every 760,000 Republican voters in the state of Oregon. And this is something that should be, it should be deliberated upon well before people show up to cast a vote on it. You can certainly make your pitch for and against at the meeting, but even in the legislature, and sometimes it's only a few hours, but or 24 hours, but even in the legislature, you get to read. You have a bill. You have a bill you can read before you vote on it. And And
exactly.
hopefully that comes to pass soon.
It kind of makes me feel like a Pelosi, you gotta vote for it before you can get it sort of thing. It makes me uncomfortable to think that we are going to make such a major decision without having information ahead of time to make it on.
Right.
So, but another argument, and I want to be fair here and cover every argument that I can think of in favor of an open gubernatorial Republican primary, not just the arguments against it. Another argument is that we're going to pull in all these non-aligned voters because the Republican nominee would show up on their ballot in the primary. So even though they're not registered with a party, if we open it up to non-aligned, then the Republican candidates, all 15 of them, or whoever makes it that far, are going to be on the non-aligned voters ballot, just like on the Republican ballot, right?
Right.
So the argument might be, well, this is good because now we're getting them to vote for a Republican, and that'll increase the odds that they'll do it in the general. Well, as you mentioned earlier, the number of people that did that before was very small. And even if you factored in the fact that we have so many more non-aligned voters due to Oregon motor voter, it wouldn't be enough to fill in that 100,000 that you're talking about that we need to close an election. So in essence, what we would be doing is we would be allowing people who don't necessarily share our values and principles to help us select a nominee on the hope that some of those would then vote for that person in the general, which has never been proven to happen. So it's a huge risk. And as you said, even though there's more NAVs, that just increases the risk, because the thing is that every time this has been tried in the past, there's evidence to show that some people, some NAVs, will vote for the weakest Republican.
Sure.
The weakest Republican, because they intend to vote Democrat in the general.
Yeah.
So we have no way of knowing or stopping that from happening. I don't know why. I'm not sure why we would open the door. But the argument in favor is, well, we get all these NAVs, voting with us, so to speak, or voting for the Republican, then they're more likely to vote in the general. I think that's a huge risk. And I think that it offsets or is the lazy way to success. And here's why I say that. What should we do? What should we be doing if we're a Republican? Registering Republicans. So we don't know how those NAVs voted. So if the argument, and this is probably going to be an argument, well, we'll have all these NAVs that have voted for a Republican, we'll target those for registration. How are you going to do that? You don't know how people voted. All you know is that they got a ballot and that they submitted that ballot, but you don't know how they voted.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you want to call them and urge them to vote in the general when they voted for the worst?
If we're going to reach out to non-aligned voters to register who got a ballot, we might as well reach out to all non-aligned voters right now and register Republican. There's no difference.
Exactly. Yeah.
That option has no risk associated with it, other than the cost of doing it.
Yeah.
It doesn't allow non-Republicans to select the Republican nominee. I think another argument, David, that's going to be put forward is, look, Betsy's not Democrat or not running as Democrat or Republican.
Good point.
Since her name won't be in the primary, the only choices you'll have is to vote Democrat or vote Republican. Therefore, she's not in the picture. Well, if the polling that they have shows that she's not in the picture, right, in the primary, then she isn't in the minds of the voter.
Right.
In other words, it's not a reason to do it. It's a reason to be concerned, because those voters may very well say, well, I voted for the best or the worst Republican in the primary. I'm talking about the non-aligns. But now that we're in the general, I'm going to go for Betsy. It doesn't prove or establish adherence to the party, because Betsy's not in the primary and then she shows up in the general later. That does, in fact, you could argue and say, well, how do those connect together?
Well, in 2012, it didn't.
It didn't. Yeah, it's never turned out to be that case in the past. So I think we're taking, if it's what we think it's going to be, which is open the Oregon Republican primary to non-aligned voters to help select the Republican nominee for governor, I think we're taking a huge risk, and it's never worked before. And the other thing that I think needs to be considered is, how is the base going to feel? The base of the Republican Party going to feel if the primary produces a more moderate candidate or a candidate farther to the left? They are going to now be disengaged and disgruntled. And so by pulling in some NAVs, we've now just alienated a bunch of the base, because the base was not happy about Newt Buehler. I can tell you that the turnout for Newt Buehler was very suppressed.
The undervote was incredible. It was the biggest undervote for both Buehler and Brown. So
for whatever we gain for pulling in non-aligneds, we lose more, in my opinion, in my estimation. We would lose more in the base not voting or undervoting, as you said. So I think the question here is this the best way to get people to register to vote? No, because you take away their incentive to register.
No, if you register someone to vote, if you register someone as a Democrat, they make that conscious decision, let's say, to change from an NAV to a Democrat, because I don't know if I mentioned it in the opening statement, but because of motor voter, we have a very small percentage of people who are eligible to vote who are not registered to vote because of motor voter. But if they, if an NAV chooses to register Democrat, they do that consciously, they do it purposely, and they're going to vote for Democrats. That's why they registered as a Democrat, because they're going to vote for Democrats. But the way we do this now, I mean, if we do what's on the proposal on the table, let's say I'm a non-affiliated voter. I don't vote. I got registered because I went to the DMV, and I get this ballot in the mail. Normally, I don't open it, but let's say there's something on my local county or the city or something. Maybe I know somebody who's running for school board or something like that. And so I open it up, and the only thing that I can vote on are county, city measures. That's the only thing that I can vote on, with the exception of I have a section of 15 Republican gubernatorial candidates who, because I don't vote, I probably know absolutely nothing about. I didn't search out any information like you do, like I do, like the people who are listening to this broadcast do, whether they're Democrat or Republican. They search out information because they want to make an informed decision. So I don't have an informed decision. So I either leave it as an undervote, I don't vote, or I pick one because of the flowery words that they say in the voter's pamphlet, right? So, and I'm done. Now, in November, I get another ballot in the mail, and maybe I open it, maybe I don't, but let's say I open it. Well, now I have another choice for governor who is a non-affiliated, like me. I don't know. I just don't think it makes as much sense as I thought that it once did in 2012.
Well, here's the thing. There is a time when this might work. So I want to talk about that for a moment.
Okay.
When would it be a good idea to have an open primary to select the Republican nominee? Here's one. You've only got one candidate running.
Excellent point. No risk.
They're either going to vote for him or they're not going to vote at all.
Right. Good point. I never thought of that.
It doesn't spread the vote. It consolidates the vote. Right. So, I'm not saying there's never a time when something shouldn't be considered. I think this should be considered by the State Central Committee. And based on what I've heard so far, I think that it's not a good idea. But I'm still concerned. I'll come back to this, David. I'm still concerned that we don't know what's in it. We don't know what's in it. We're just being told by people, here's what's in it. And until we see the actual language, we don't know exactly what we're voting for. And so I can tell you that as a voter, most people will not vote if they don't have enough information to vote, they generally don't vote or they vote no. And
I do it.
There's a good reason for that. I mean, think about judges. How many of us actually vote for judges, right? We don't know anything about these judges, right? So a lot of times we don't even fill out that part. If we know anything about the judges, we might vote for somebody, like you were talking about with Betsy coming on later, who's now a non-aligned, right?
Yeah.
The lights go on. Oh, I have a choice now.
Yeah.
You know, so I hope that we have something to consider sooner rather than later, and not the day of, and that there's an opportunity for the state central committee members to discuss the merits of it before they make a decision on it, well before they've had a chance to sleep on it, in other words, before they make a decision, because this is huge and it sets a precedent, and it's never worked in the past. And there's probably going to be an argument made, well, it's going to work this time because of whatever. And one of those arguments is probably, well, the way that things have been handled by the governor and Democrats here in Oregon, people are fed up and they're going to come our way. Well, then I would say you have a prime, ripe opportunity to register them Republican. That's the real win.
Yeah.
That's the real win. Not borrow them for a moment to select a gubernatorial candidate on the hope that they might then in the general select that person, that there's some sort of momentum created out of that, which has never been demonstrated in the past.
Right.
So I think that another bottom line thing for me that I hope people will consider is, what are we willing to do to win? Are we willing to sacrifice our platform and principles in order to possibly have a better chance at winning? Because if we are, we're not very cohesive party that believes what it believes.
Right. Well,
Right?
and we have a very pointed platform. It's not like a Democrat platform with a couple of vague paragraphs. People believe what they believe in the Republican Party, and I think that's one of the things that make us Republicans.
You know, as chair, I supported Newt Buehler because that was my job. I was required to, under the rules, once he won the primary.
Right.
Once he won the primary. And despite, what people may think, the party is not supposed to get involved in the primary candidates. And we didn't, despite claims to the contrary. It's always by the other candidates that didn't do as well.
Yeah.
The party supported this person or that person. No, the party stays neutral, provides the same resources and opportunities to all of the candidates. And I'll tell you, for myself, I don't want another Newt Buehler. I want another Dennis Richardson.
Yeah, I agree.
You get there by standing on your principles. One last point I want to say, David, is that people respected Dennis Richardson because he stood on his principles, and they will do the same thing for future candidates. If the candidate is otherwise viable, in other words, they can win. Otherwise, they're not completely unable to win for a variety of reasons. If they're otherwise viable, people will choose to go with the person who is outside their party. In other words, Democrats voted for Dennis. Non-aligneds voted for Dennis in big numbers. Why? Because he was genuine, because he stood true to his principles, even though those principles didn't match their own in many cases. And that is the kind of party that we should be. Those are the kind of candidates that's the kind of candidate that Newt was not. He kept caving to the left. And that's the kind of the candidate that Dennis was. He held his principles, but focused on the job at hand and convince voters he was the right guy to do it. And he was. And he won handily.
He did, yeah.
So I hope everyone listening, and I hope our state central committee will take some of these things we've talked about into consideration and really demand more information about what you're voting on before you actually cast a vote.
Yeah, and if you're a Republican voter, I think you should probably get a hold of your county party and ask them where they stand on it and let them know how you feel about it.
Make an informed decision.
Yeah, make an informed decision. Well, you presented some great points, both for and against, and it's good for people to talk about this. There's no reason to not bring it out in the open and discuss it and have a knockdown, drag out fight if you need to, but have a nice civil discussion about it and kick around ideas, because personally I'm all in for ideas that make sense and work.
I don't think. Sorry.
And in this particular instance, I've seen it before, and it doesn't make sense, and I don't think it'll work. It's just that simple, you know?
Yeah, I don't think people should vote party line just because it's the party line. I think they should understand what they're voting for. If you believe in something, then that's what you should vote for. And if you believe in our platform, if you believe in what it means to be a conservative and a Republican, then you should vote for the candidate that's closest to those ideals, not the one that's farther away. And because voters in Oregon have made it really clear that they need to see a contrast between the Democrat and the Republican, or the candidates that are running. They need to see a contrast. If they don't see a contrast, if the Republican looks more like the Democrat, they will tend to go with the Democrat. Like you said, they will go with what they know, the devil they know than the devil they don't know. But if they can see a contrast and they can go, look, this guy over here is going to stop what Kate Brown was doing clearly, and is going to be true to our platform, or true to their own principles and beliefs, I can trust that person, just like they did with Dennis.
Yeah. Agreed. Well, great discussion, Bill. Any last words before we wrap it up?
No, it's a huge decision. As we've talked about, there's a number of things to consider. We need to see in fine print what the actual decision is. David and I have been talking here about what we've heard it will be. So the actual final proposal could be different, but we need to have that sooner rather than later so that we can consider it properly. And I hope, as you said, David, I hope everyone will request from their up the chain, so to speak, through their county leaders and so on. Let's get a copy of this. Let's consider this. Let's talk about this. And then let's go as informed voters to the Central Committee meeting and vote and make a good decision. Not just, you got to do this, you got to do it right now because we're out of time. And this is a wonderful idea. By the way, the polls may show that voters would vote for a Republican, but again, Betsy's not part of the picture right now. So did the poll ask, well, if you had these three candidates, who would you vote for? Or did it just say, if you could vote in the primary, would you? And if there was only Republicans in the primary, would you vote for one of them? That's not a fair question. That's not the big picture here. Yeah. So,
well, if I personally had to make a decision based upon data from polling, I would just say, show me the data.
Show me the data. Yeah.
Don't tell me the data. Show me all of the data, the questions asked, the responses, all that stuff. I mean, I'm not the smartest guy, around, but I think I can make a decision based on the data. So.
Yep. Yeah. And our state central committee members need to, and PCPs that are listening to this need to understand or remember that whatever is done on February 5 in Salem in regard to the Oregon primaries by the Republican Party sets a precedent. And if we do that, then it has a huge impact. This is not a small thing. This isn't a small decision. And so I just hope people will take it seriously and really, and the other thing, David, you said we got to have the data, but we got to have the proposal in front of us. We also have to have the polling data or whatever justification was used to put forward this proposal in the first place.
Right.
In other words, you can argue that something is the case, that more NAVs will vote with us, but where's the data to support that? So let's make sure that we have the data to support the justification for doing this before we do it.
Yeah, I agree.
Don't do it.
Or don't do it. Yeah. Well, before we make a decision, we have to make an informed decision. We need informed consent here, right, Bill?
Don't get me started on COVID and all of that. But yeah, exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
And just like open borders are bad, open primaries are bad too. So
yeah, it's kind of the same principle, isn't it? You got people sneaking over the border.
People who shouldn't have the privilege having the privilege.
Right. Yeah. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us this evening. Again, Bill Currier, Restore Oregon Now. I'm David Darnell, Restore Oregon Now. You can find us at restoreoregonnow.org on the web. That's restoreoregonnow.org. Find us on Facebook, Stop the Abuse, Restore Oregon Now, Twitter, Restore Oregon Now, Instagram, Restore Oregon Now, and all those other ones I think as well. And I can't remember what they are, but we are completely and totally platformed. Go to our website, sign up for our newsletter, and just check us out. And, we're here to work for you. And we're going to continue to do that until we actually restore Oregon, either now or later. We're going to get it done either way.
Yeah, and keep you informed.
Yeah.
The whole idea. Exactly. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Yeah, good night.